And by the time, it'll be a minute and then we'll get started the presentation. So welcome everyone, welcome C5 and guests and friends who are here, and people keep trickling in. We're so excited to have you. So myself, Corva, and Shervin are the C5 Alumni Committee. And as you know, we've been bugging you about this on Slack for a while now, but this is the first in a series of alumni workshop sessions that we're really excited to host. Christina is our alumni rep at LinkedIn along with Katie, and she did us the honor of pulling Kevin and Jay to speak with us today, and we're so excited. So for those of you who don't know, Christina is a design manager at LinkedIn. She's been there for over 3 years and is currently managing a team of designers working on the Pages product, which enables organizations to create an online presence on LinkedIn. Previously, she worked as a consultant at Deloitte for over 5 years doing technology implementations. And as you know, she has a Master's of Interaction Design from CCA and a Bachelor's of Business from the University of Notre Dame. Jay is a principal product manager at LinkedIn. He has over 7 years experience working as a PM at various companies like Google before he joined LinkedIn. And he leads a cross-functional team working on audiences under the LinkedIn Marketing Solutions product, which enables customers to find and connect with members through the ads platform. Previously pivoted from healthcare, and he was a clinical researcher in his past. He studied biophysics, physiology, public health, and molecular biology at Georgetown, Harvard, and UCLA. And lastly, we have Kevin here. Kevin is a senior UX designer at LinkedIn based in New York. He has over 6 years of experience working as a UX designer at past companies like Google and various startups. He currently works on leading the experience for LinkedIn Live, which is a new video broadcast experience for those who want to watch live streams from content creators. He has a BFA in computer animation and interactive media from the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. We are so pleased to have you three here, and having seen a bit of this presentation yesterday, I am particularly excited. I will hand it over to you three and let everyone else trickle in as they do. And thank you again for being here.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for that intro, Tess. And if Kevin and Jay are curious how she got that awesome intro, we grabbed it from your LinkedIn profiles. So yeah. But anyway, for those, again, today we're going to be talking more about what it's like working with product managers. This group of people, I've actually worked with Kevin on several initiatives at LinkedIn, and thought he would be like a great person to come and talk more about working with PMs. He has some wonderful stories about some good PMs and some not so good experiences that he's had, and some experiences we've had together actually in terms of dealing with that. So I think there'll be a lot of fun tidbits there. And Jay is a product manager. I worked with him for a very short stint. We had maybe one project together for like a month before I transitioned over to Pages. But honestly, Jay is one of my favorite product managers that I've worked with at LinkedIn. He's like really sharp. Plus he's married to a product designer at Facebook, so he knows his design stuff, which is definitely very appreciated. Yeah, I'm gonna skip intros unless Kevin and Jay, you wanna add anything to your intro?
No, I'm good.
That's really hard to top. That's kind of awesome, guys. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. And then one thing, just like housekeeping, if you guys don't mind, since the session's actually not very big, if you guys want to turn on your cameras, it would be great just to kind of see your faces. If you're completely uncomfortable, don't have to do so either. Also, if you just have like questions throughout, feel free to drop them in chat. Also, we'll be making sure we spend some time at the end for proper Q&A, but we'll just kind of go from there. So, okay. So just kind of start off in terms of sharing more about the agenda. So today, what we want to give you guys an overview of what is product management and what do product managers do. And then we'll talk a lot more about how product and design intersects. I'm sure you guys have heard a lot in class around that product managers you'll be working with a lot, and you need to understand the business side, but what does that actually mean? And then lastly, Kevin's gonna give some tactical tips in terms of how to work with PMs and deal with situations where you're working with a good PM and one where it's not so hot. So how can you work through those different situations? And then we'll go through Q&A at the end. So actually, we want to start off with a fun question. We want to know, what do you guys actually know about product managers? Like, what do you actually think it does? Feel free to drop it in chat, or if you're brave enough and speak up, feel free to unmute yourself and share your thoughts here. And there's no right or wrong answer because we'll give you the answers later. So we just want to hear from your perspectives.
They tell me what to do.
They coordinate like different team and resources.
Nice.
Work to create alignment, like
Alignment, owner of products, I see. Good answers. Yeah, go ahead.
I also think they almost offer like a service between designers, developers, and different people of the team.
Nice. Something between design and engineering. That's a good one, Josh. Any other thoughts here?
They're bound to a project, and everyone who works on that project, like they're in charge of keeping them in track and whatever they do, like documentation, stuff like that.
Good answer, Hardik.
I think they're like the owner of the product and they set the directions, sort of.
Yes, sort of. That's a good one. All right, and then Shelby says sits at the intersection of design and tech. Yes. So the answer is you guys are all correct to an extent, but I'll let Jay I'll pass it off to Jay here and let him share more from his perspective what he actually does in his day-to-day. So thank you all for sharing those insights.
It's very insightful, also very terrifying. Especially the first one I heard, which was awesome, is tells me what to do. I think that's what I heard, or push go around. So let's be honest, what does a product manager do? They probably do all of those things, depending on what team you might have joined or what product manager you work with. Let's separate that away from what a product manager should do, or ideally, where their core competencies are. So this definition is that Google definition. In the absence of Webster's dictionary, we're going to start off with a Google definition of what a product manager is. So they own the business strategy behind the product. They give you the specs and they say, hey, this is how we're going to launch the feature. But if we unpack it a little bit, I think someone also alluded to, multiple people alluded to this in the chat, is product is that intersection between our users, our customers, our technology, and business. So in that intersection, we need to be able to understand our customers and users' needs. We need to be able to advocate for them, the same way that design does. We need to understand what technologies are available or what we can build towards, maybe if they don't exist yet. And then we also need to understand the needs or goals of the business and how it fits into the industry landscape. Because you have to keep in mind, in a tiny company, when you have one product manager and you're all trying to figure out what to build, this person should know, how are we going to make our startup succeed? How do we grow from here? So it can't be one feature just to make a user happy. How do we build something that's engaging, that's sticky, that will actually drive innovation? So with this holistic understanding, products should be able to partner well with design, engineering, marketing, other cross-functional teams to take something from conception to market. I like looking at this in a different way. I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with the term like running the pass, either because you've worked in the industry or you've watched Hell's Kitchen and you thought, oh God, I'm not saying Gordon Ramsay is a PM, not saying that at all. But if you have any experience around this, the person that runs the pass, it's that role that can be occupied by the head chef, the manager, the sous chef. It's that person that sits between that front of house and that back of house. So the front of house being the tables and the customers, back house being the kitchen, the line station chefs, pastry chefs, to create that clarity around principles, to check quality, to pivot the teams as necessary as the situation changes. We suddenly have a large party of like 20 come in. They all look like huge football players. Maybe we should throw the stakes right now. That might happen, right? So it's that person that sits in the middle to help connect. Right? How do I accelerate? How do I not act as a bottleneck, but create that vision, that clarity, in order to take this team of specialists who know how to build these individual pieces well, a collective product that makes sense. So my success as a product manager is being measured by my ability to drive impact. I'm only as effective as how well I'm able to inspire this collective team to build great things. So what does that actually look like? And this is the reason why what you guys mentioned all makes sense. PMs look different everywhere. So when you go to a PM talk or even sitting on like PM Academy, General Assembly, you're going to hear a different speech from everyone, but the truth is it's very, very different depending on the stage of the company, or maybe the titles vary because the needs of the organization are different. If you're a technical product manager, you probably might not work with a designer. You'll work on infrastructure and technology design. If you are more of a consulting agency, you might be more of a project manager. How do we make sure we ship things on time? So depending on the needs of the org, that title or that role varies a little bit. Having said that, there's also a confusion in the space. It's a discipline that is still maturing. Now you got to keep in mind, product management didn't truly exist in more as a structured discipline for anything longer than about 15 years. So when people say they were a product manager 20 years plus, it's like, what were you at that point in time? And it's interesting to get like clarity on how that role has changed. So what do product managers actually do? Hopefully you don't walk away at the end of this talk thinking all we do is tell you what to do, because that is not the takeaway here, but focusing on the core competencies. So for product managers, there's 4 areas that you actually have to be very strong in. Strategy, defining what of the vision, right? The principles and the success metrics on how we should build something. You know, strategy is not the same thing as specs, right? It's not about the requirements. We move into the operational, right? Which is the how do we do the work? I'm creating artifacts in order to create team alignment, to create distribution. How do I define the resourcing and the timing around these pieces? How do we maybe go to market? That all has to factor in line with the strategy we might have defined. And then we move into like cross-functional. With all these specialists, with all these teams we work with, how do we make this work? So how does a PM act as an accelerant, a facilitator, or the nexus in order to bring that clarity and focus to the project, but also to sell that vision to other teams? Because invariably, if you work in a large org, you're going to get blocked by another team. In the marketing org, or marketing solutions, we leverage engagement that comes out of our organic experience. So there is that interplay that exists between teams and between PMs. So how do I actually help my team continue to do the work without being blocked in that way? And then ultimately you get to like execution. You know, day-to-day working with design, research, how do we do backlogging? How do we find some of the things that we're building? If we find ourselves stuck because something is not feasible from a tech perspective under the timeline that we have, even though design really wants it, what's a compromise that makes sense? How can we work together between our 3 parties to find that natural solution that fits in order for us to hit a timeline? So in the context of the software development lifecycle, this probably isn't very foreign to you. And the focus for most designers is in the first 2 phases, and that's, you know, discover design. But I think there's more and more growing understanding the value of both product and design playing a role in all 4 phases. So when we think about the design process, which you guys are all very familiar with, you know, it lays out, you know, across the thing, you're engaged. There's so much activity, front loaded. You continue to support the team through development and deployment. So the product manager naturally, as your partner, should evolve throughout that whole cycle, right? So as we partner through the process, for me, and we're going to get into each of these areas a little bit more deeply, what I expect from a product designer, and note that I'm not saying UI designer, production designer, UX designer, but a product designer is a partner. We align, as we mentioned in the beginning, around that team concept. We partner to make sure we're building around the same principles. Not getting in the weeds around specs, but how do we make sure we're aligned on the priorities, the main pain points, the kinds of workflows we want to support, so that throughout this journey, we are almost interchangeable from a team's perspective and voicing opinion and priorities. You should be able to trust your PM. Crazy concept, I know, but you should also be able to trust your designer, and hopefully this is something mutual. So diving in one step deeper. So looking at each phase. So through discovery, we're exploring and defining the user or business problem. There's 3 main things that need to happen: research, strategy, road mapping. So while these things continue to be worked on through the development phase and even after launch, doing this well sets up the team for success. So though this seems like things for a product, this is also that storming, forming phase for the team, right? I need to sell that vision so my team knows exactly what we should be doing or how we should be doing it at a high level, even though we're not in the weeds yet. So we focus on understanding the problem, potential solutions in the market, defining priorities and principles on the why we plan to build this or how we plan to build this, because it lets everyone on the team know now what part they play and sets a vision for everyone to be able to stretch their creative muscle. And we'll get into this as well later with Kevin, but you know, I, as a product manager in phase, should be able to create enough structure for my engineers, for my designers to do their job really well without telling them what to do. So that's how I'm pushing back on that earlier comment, just so you guys know. So we get to that design phase. This phase is actually my favorite. So we did all this work to understand the landscape. We started making plans. We talked about principles. The team is like well greased. They're communicating well. Now at this point, it allows us to work with both product designers and engineering leads to think about how we might build product X. To transfer product to say, play a more supportive role to design and engineering by sharing knowledge of industry standards, competitive intel, how we might create market differentiating features as an to inspire the team. But then design and engineering get a chance to flex creative solutions and validate those solutions through the research to land on that right thing built for our users. I'll stop for a sec just to take a quick look at the chat. Is this diagram always sequential? If feasibility a concern, co-design should promote? Yes, absolutely. So the design is, that diagram is meant to be linear just to simplify the process, but there's cycles. You know, and you certainly expect that as it goes along because it's never that simple. Is there an implication that designers participate in all foundational research, strategy docs, planning, and roadmap? You know, it kind of depends on your team dynamic and how the org is structured. I absolutely welcome designers to be part of the early process because it helps us, you know, not take the transactional relationship where I tell you this is what we're doing and this is a strategy, but more of a, let's treat this as a growth and learning exercise. This is why we're doing it a certain way. And the why drives so much of how we align in the future. So absolutely encourage that wherever possible. In many cases, I would say, especially at LinkedIn, we try to advocate for that as much as possible.
Yeah, can I add to that, Jay?
Yeah, please, go for it.
Yeah, and I think, Maxime, for your question, it's an indicator if you're at an organization that has a healthy design process for you to be included as part of that. It's a red flag to me when I'm looking for jobs if like design it doesn't have any partake in that, and we're really just focused on this part, the design phase, which Jay is showing, where we're just purely executing on UX. That means that design might not be viewed as a strategic partner, and you might not have that influence to push with research and stuff like that. You can always change that, but it's a lot harder. So I think it's important to make sure that you have a healthy relationship between product and design and engineering at an org that you're looking for.
Also, just to add to that too, a lot when you're looking at job titles can reveal a lot about that. Like if you see something that's like, I need a UI UX designer, you know, like that's usually a tell that they like are kind of narrowing down like what their like expectations are for you, versus something that's like product designer, user experience designer, that's a little bit more like holistic and paints that picture of like what we actually think your role is.
That's right. So like this isn't your responsibility in that strategy piece. You know, the same way you don't expect a PM to do the Figma work, right, per se, hopefully, knock on wood. But you should be an active participant. And that thing is really critical and key to your ability to scale, not just the product, but your team and ideally your company. And for all those reasons that they mentioned before, super happy when design wants to partake in that process. So we enter the development phase. We're finally building something. So obviously these things are, you know, often overlooked is a role that product and design teams play with engineers in the development phase, but it shouldn't be. So with startups or even more with larger companies, things often don't go as planned, right? And that's like the biggest thing we also need to like rally our head around, and why it's not linear. It has to be cyclical and iterative. So communication becomes really, really critical at this phase, right? Because best laid plans will eventually go to shit. So what do? How do you pivot? How do you respond? Since product design and engineering are the teams that are deeply involved in the early stages, QA is also best supported by like these collective teams. So you do QA cycles in whether or not your engineers are building it the way that you had designed. You test it when you have that in a demo or a bug bash. And you as that stakeholder should be speaking up most for your area, your charter, your domain, and contribution to that product that's been developed. But at the same time, you remember back in the beginning, we talked about strategy and aligning principles. You're also an advocate for me as product. Are we building in a way that's sustainable and scalable? Are we building in a way that makes sense to our users in the whole journey of the ecosystem? When we consider what we're using elsewhere in their tech stack, what else are they using to do their job? So, you know, this is it takes a village. It's a very community exercise, even as we go into market. So as a PM works with marketing and sales to align and go-to-market plans and supports them to roll out these releases, you'll find that, you know, the PM will drive the majority of this work. However, having said that, design also is often consulted on these things. you know, because they'll ask like, what features are you building later? Can you give me a design mock so we can understand and inform the agency that's creating content for us to provide that context? It's amazing how much people don't put the emphasis on the why in providing that context in order to help shape things beyond the initial task. So, you know, certainly it matters here too. Lesser so, but still very important. So finally, we ship the product. Awesome. Now, if your PM steps away at this point in time, I'm just going to say it, they're a PM. Shipping things, ramping things, putting it on your LinkedIn profile and leaving is the hallmark of someone that says, okay, I'm done. I can walk away. I got success. I'm going to try to get promoted. For me, like when I look at this, this is what's the right word? How a product lands is actually a testament to how good of a job you actually did, right? Because it sets you up to truly understand if you built the right thing. So you did well, you shipped the product and everyone was really excited, but what happens after that? Is your company going to grow? Is your feature going to get adopted? So I'm sure there's many experiences that you guys might have already had where you said, this feature would be so great if they just did one thing, or are they ever going to fix that? And it's so obvious to you, but no one touches it. It's because they never thought of this, right? What happens after that? So as a PM, I'm responsible for evaluating from a data-driven approach. Did this land well? Is creating the growth and adoption that I want? And if it's not, how do we optimize and iterate on that? So you'd work with data science partner, biz ops, marketing to get that collective quantitative and qualitative feedback in order to come back to your team and say, here's how we should tweak this feature, or how do we prepare ourselves for the next phase of our roadmap? So if I can leave you with one thing, product managers, I think, you know, as product owners, we don't manage teams directly. So product managers are only good as their team. So, you know, as product managers go through the actions of each of the phases we discussed or reviewed, the most important job of a PM is their ability to foster that partnership around shared principles. If I'm doing my core job around strategy, around the research phase and everything else, well, you know, that's just expected. But this shared principle concept is so critical to me being successful as product manager that everything else is essentially icing on the cake. So with that, I will hand off to Christine.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Yeah, and I have to say, like, what I wholeheartedly agree with Jay. I think having a good PM can make or break your experience as a product designer. So we'll kind of get into that a little bit more. So what I want to talk about here now is more of responsibilities of PM and design. As you guys are hearing Jay, there's probably a lot of things you're like, huh, that's like exactly what designers do. So like, how does this really intersect with each other here? So I would say, again, in general, is that when you're working with product, they are probably the most important partner that you're going to work with. Obviously, engineering is a big part of it too, but because product and design are so closely throughout the software development lifecycle, they're going to be the #1 person you interface with the most in your day-to-day. So what is actually the role between design and product? So in design, we're taught that, you know, we're always thinking about users first. We're thinking about the member experience, that is the core key part of what our day-to-day jobs are. And in product, a lot of the time, you know, they have backgrounds coming from business or respective disciplines. So they think a lot about the metrics and how the business does and how do we grow and monetize. But in reality, it's actually a little bit of both. So within design, to be a really good, effective designer, you also really have to understand the business side of things and why we're creating things that create value for not just our users, but the business in itself. And then on the flip side, for PMs, they also need to think about the users, because you can create the most money-making product out there, but if nobody wants to use it, then it's not a success either. And then even more on that, we kind of have to layer on, this is the engineering piece, that technical feasibility. So our engineering partners really help ground both design and product in terms of what is capable in terms of doing, and helps us really execute that vision. So we also have to understand that holistically across in both of these roles too. So ultimately, at the end of the day, product and design is in charge of creating a quality product. And for you guys, what you might be interested in is, well, what makes quality? So this, again, is that 3-ring diagram that we showed earlier. But the thing that's important in making a really good product out there is that you need to have user value, a strong business goal, and it needs to be well executed. And where that sweet spot is right in between where that quality product is. So product design and engineering, we must always be focused on these three things to create that perfect trifecta. So with that, I actually want to kind of pause here and open it up for students. Can you guys think of an example of maybe something that was a popular product, but that wasn't quality, and why? So what I'm looking at for the quality definition here is that maybe it's missing one side of this triangle. Any examples here?
Fine.
Okay, and why is that, Tess?
I think it was really, really popular, and it made no money.
Example. All right. I see Google Classroom as an example. So does somebody want to explain that a little bit?
Okay, so that is me. So I think all of us have been using Google Classroom for CCA, and even though across universities Google Classroom is quite popular, I'm not sure if it's very user friendly, because there are these technical things like if you've missed an assignment, it goes away from the notification altogether, so you're not reminded of that unless you go to the stream and look at all the assignments that are missed. So these small things, and then it might not be also able to remind you where the assignments are, which ones are due, which ones are not, so things like that. But definitely very popular because it's a Google product.
Yeah, Kevin and Jay, you guys used to work at Google. Maybe you could pass that feedback on to some of your buddies there. I actually knew a designer who used to work on Google. Yeah, you worked on. That's funny.
I'm so sorry, I don't know.
Oh, no, I almost worked on it. I didn't.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I knew somebody who worked on it, but hey, the feedback is valid, guys. So don't feel like your opinion doesn't matter here. Like, you are the end user, so these are all really good ones. Maybe we can take one more example, because so that we can move on for the sake of time. Somebody mentioned Craigslist. Mahesh, do you want to share a little bit more about why Craigslist?
Yeah, hi. I'd say it's a utility product, but personally find it very, very cluttered. And it looks like it's from the 2001 to or something like that kind of interface. So I'm sure it's got its benefits, but it could do with at least a little better sort of layout or UI. And yeah, it looks like classifieds. So maybe that's the idea, but I personally find it very cluttered and not fun to use at all. So.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, and I'll throw in one more example, because I think you guys covered a lot of great examples that provided user value and were well executed, or business and user value but not well executed. But I'll cover one where it had business goals and was well executed but no user value. I would say Google Glass. Sorry to throw Google in there again. I swear we don't hate Google here, but yeah, but Google Glass is one of those products where it's very engineering led. They had an idea that it would bring into a lot of opportunities to have mobile devices on your face, and there's a lot of opportunities for advertisement and stuff like that. So there's a ton of business value. The problem was for users, it was creepy. A lot of people didn't like it. It felt like it was an invasion of privacy that made people look like geeks, and it was just not a very pleasant experience. So it never really picked up that traction because of it. So again, I think it's important for all of us as we're working at these companies to make sure that there is a fine balance for the quality product, because in your day-to-day, that's going to be a big essential part of this. So, okay, so let me go back to this now. So in terms of what actually makes a quality product, we kind of talked about this, right? Product and design, we have to overlap all of this, and we work together as part of it. But because we're so closely aligned, there can actually be tension that happens between product and design. And it happens quite often, but it's a healthy tension because everyone feels ownership to their perspective area. Sometimes what the user wants isn't aligned to what the business wants. So how do you kind of resolve that? And I think it's okay to embrace this particular tension. It just makes the product better. It also makes you as a designer feel more compelled to help the user out there too. But I'll kind of pass it off now to Kevin to talk more specifically around how to embrace this tension and share some tactical tips around that.
All right, I get the most fun one. So let me see what we got. Presentation control here. Cool. So we talked a little bit about a PM and what they do, what the responsibilities are, and how that kind of overlaps with design's role. But now we're going to be talking about, like I said, the most fun topic is how do designers and PMs work with each other. So the first thing really is just learning how each other works. You know, there's a lot of different work styles and communication styles, and this is true of any, you know, working relationship. But because the PM and design relationship is so important and you overlap in those roles so much, it's something that I've always put particular focus on. So I would say my first thing is, again, really just trying to learn how each other works. Like, does your PM like to be really collaborative and jam like together? Like my current PM, like when we have an idea, we'll just open a doc and start like just brain dumping thoughts in there. You know, back in the day when we used to meet in real life, like we would jam on whiteboards together. You know, are they kind of more methodical and structured in their approach? They more go with the flow? Or for some PMs that will like literally like meticulously document everything every step of the way, and others that'll just be like, yeah, sure, that sounds good, and you know, have to follow up later. You know, and then also just like your working style too, and how does that mesh? Like I've also had some PMs that, you know, don't necessarily like to like collaborate right away. Like what they like to do is kind of diverge and, you know, go off and like, you know, kind of consolidate their thoughts, while, you know, some designers also like to do that too. They're like, I want to go and like, you know, kind of go heads down, do some thinking, do some design, and then we can come back together and then we can exchange ideas and feedback. So really learning that working style is going to be pretty important, and you'll learn that over time, but it's also important to really just kind of set those expectations up front. If you know how you want to work with a PM, if you want to be in there early and collaborate, just tell them right away. I had this one PM I was working with on this project. The designer and her team like left and they didn't have resources. So they're like, okay, can you like jump on this project? I was like, okay. So new product manager, never worked with them before. She set up like a kickoff meeting just for us to meet. And she just like asked me, she's like, so how do you like to work with PMs? And I was like, oh, that's a refreshing change of pace. Like just to be asked like right away. And I was like, oh, this is great. I can just like, I like to collaborate. I like to, you know, early on, you know, work together. And what was nice is it kind of just set that tone for our relationship, you know, moving forward, is that, you know, okay, like always like, you know, invite the designer early on and so on and so forth. So I'll go over some ways and tips to collaborate in like different places across like the life cycle and different surfaces you can collaborate with your PM on. So product documents. Has anybody heard what a PRD is? Okay.
Jay, I'm glad you raised your hand.
Yeah. Okay. So a PRD is essentially a product requirements doc, as it says. I have an example one here with, you know, some redacted stuff or projects that we recently did. But essentially what a PRD is kind of a source of truth doc. You know, as Jay was saying, like the PM is like the nexus of communication across engineering, design, and data science and all these different functions. Like I would say the PRD sometimes is the manifestation of that in terms of a place where you can actually, people or engineers can know exactly what the scope of the project is, how it works, what, you know, what exact, or, you know, sometimes you'll have like screenshots in there of the design and like engineers will have conversations. Usually sometimes we'll also have a little bit of our goals, like how we're measuring success in there. And what's nice about these is that it could become really like a flashpoint for engineering and product and design to have a conversation on things. Like in this one, you can see that like, here's our like MVP and here's our scope for this. And there's some later phases too. But sometimes you use this like as a conversation to be like, are we sure this should be phase 2? I think this should be phase 1. And like, you can actually, you know, talk about the scope together, you know, but also, you know, engineers will also, you know, say like, hey, you know, this actually isn't that hard. Like maybe we can move this, you know, into MVP, or maybe we should move this out of MVP because there's no way we can do it. So what's really good about PRDs is it can really be this point for you to, you know, for the team to really meet and collaborate. One pagers are, you know, it depends on, PMs like use PRDs differently. Like some of them will be like, it's very much specific for the requirements doc. Like once we know what we're doing and we're narrowing it down, like that's the PRD. And then they'll have these things called one pagers, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a 1-page document where it's very kind of like high level. Like, hey, we think we have this idea, we know we want to solve this problem, this is our loose strategy for how to accomplish it. It tends to be at the more beginning of the product development process, whereas PRDs can tend to be a little bit more in the defined stage. Does the PM take the lead on creating and maintaining the document? Generally, yes. I would say the PM definitely owns that. Although, you know, interestingly, I can talk about working with a bad PM where I've had to like jump in and like make PRDs because our engineers are just like, wait, like, there's no documentation. How does this work? I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then strategy docs are, you know, exactly what they sound like. It's a document that outlines the strategy, that shows the opportunity, the vision. This is where we're gonna go. And this is also a really great doc for design to really get in there and be like, have we considered this? You know, why are we focusing on this? And this is a really great place for conversations too. So all these kind of documents, like the tools that PMs use, are all great opportunities for you to get in there and collaborate with your PM. And then on the other side, how does design actually collaborate with PMs too? You know, it's not just one-way street here too. So there's a lot of different tools we use. One thing that we've been, what's been really great for you know, LinkedIn is we switched over to Figma, which is cloud-based kind of design program. It's like the Google Docs of design. And what's been great about that is it really just opens up and makes your design process from the early stages, exploration, all the way to it being defined, really easy to share with your PMs and get feedback. Like they can kind of pop into the file and comment on it. You know, so you don't want to have your files be like holed up on your laptop that no one can ever see until you like, you know, have them 100% ready. You really want to get that feedback early on. But you know, not every organization uses Figma, so if you use Sketch, which is a little bit more local. Another thing we typically do is these things called rolling decks, where you know you get like a Google Slides presentation, and you can put like little screenshots and explorations of your designs in progress in the doc, and then you can share that out easily. That's really great too, as like an alternative for like if you don't have things that are cloud-based, you can actually just you know make a presentation and like share that around. And then prototypes too. Clickable prototypes are really good to, you know, share with your PM so they can like click through it. And a lot of times that's great because they'll catch things like that you didn't, and then they'll ask questions, and then you can kind of go back and iterate on that. Again, like, you know, we use Figma, which is like really great for sharing out prototypes, but you know, there's like Envision in a lot of these products that you can use to just, that are really cloud-based that you can just share out. But the point is to really just make your designs accessible, make it feel you know, inclusive early on, because that's going to foster that relationship too, versus if you just say like, I'm not going to show you my designs until like the final reveal like later and don't get feedback on. Just meetings in general. You know, one meeting that, you know, is always really useful is like me and my product partner, we have like a one-on-one meeting every week where basically we just like have 30 minutes to kind of catch up on anything from like tactical stuff, like how things are going, to talk about long-term stuff. And we burn through that time super quick because we are always talking about something. Scheduled jam time was another one that I had with my product partner where, you know, if we're in the early stages of a product or a feature and we're still trying to figure it out, we would schedule time for us to just meet and go over things. Open office hours was another fun one too. You know, we used to, for a while, what we would do early on is we would have these like this open meeting invite that engineers could just drop in and ask us questions, which was really cool because engineers would all like, as much as we communicate, and we communicate a lot of stuff falls in the cracks. So being able to just have that open for engineers to just come in and just ask us whatever's on their mind is great. And if no engineers need to ask us, you know, questions, then, you know, it just becomes more jam time for me and the RPM. And also just make sure that they're coming to major design reviews too. We have various design reviews at various different levels of leadership throughout LinkedIn. So always make sure your product partner's there, you know, so they can see and hear the feedback and, of how it's going. But also a lot of times they can answer more technical questions for you. You know, like sometimes like design leadership will be like, why are we doing this again? And PMs can really add a lot of insight there. A product partner is a PM. So we're kind of using them interchangeably. Like product manager is the role, but we refer to them as our product partners, and product refers to us as their design partners. All right, working with a good PM. So It's actually nice about this is most of the stuff that Jay described is what's working, like what it's like working with a good PM. I'll talk a little bit about my experiences working with PMs and why I really value. Like Jay was mentioning, like being that kind of nexus of communication and really facilitating, all these different cross functions among the team and bringing them together and helping them align. I think that's what I value the most about a PM. And then also really just as part of, leaving that open and making it so you leave creative space for all the different, cross functions. For me, what I really value is when a PM will say, like, these are the problems we're facing, based on, like data or other inputs, and this is where we're going to focus. But I'm not going to come with predefined solutions. I think to me, and I think that's really what frustrates a lot of designers, is when a PM comes in and says, like, this is the problem and this is the feature we're going to build, and okay, like, give me some designs, please. Design is treated more as like a service. To just like crank out wireframes and flows. I think that is generally the mark of like a not so great PM, but it also kind of just demotivates the team. So my PM's been really good. One of the things recently, we had a project where my PM partnered with data science and partnered with BizOps, which essentially what they did is they did a funnel analysis of our product, which what that basically means is they analyzed like all the different flows along the way and all the different touch points to reaching what our stated goal is. And they said, like, this part in the funnel is where we're having a problem. This is where we're going to focus. So let's leave it up to that. And what was great about that is it kept it open for not just design, but for like engineering to like weigh in. Like everybody feels like they can have opportunities to have ideas and input there. Like sometimes our engineers were like, well, we can like update like the AI or like the relevance models to do this. I can be like, I have a couple different ideas that might help us get there. So I think that's what I really value about my current PM is like leaving those opportunities open and making a conversation to bring the team in versus just kind of, acting like unilaterally saying like, this is what we're going. So that's what I really value with working with a good PM, which is mostly what Jay describes. So dealing with conflict, you're gonna have disagreements. It's definitely unavoidable. Like I've never worked with a PM where we 100% aligned on everything, but it's important to find a way to work through those things. Like sometimes like I would be working with PMs where like the broad vision we're not like exactly aligned on, like their strategy we're not really aligned on, but we align on the details easily. And then sometimes I've worked with PMs where the broad vision, like we're totally aligned on, but then like I'm sitting there arguing about button sizes with them. So like, there's always going to be something there. And it's just important to, find ways to kind of get through it. So the one piece of advice I have is to really focus on framing. And what I mean by framing is like how you present your work, how you make a persuasive case, and how you get buy-in for that. It's really important. It's like a baseline standard for designers to do that. But I think what this really helps is not necessarily dealing with conflict, but it helps avoid conflicts a lot of times because so much conflict just comes from miscommunication. So really being able to kind of justify your design decisions, whether it's like the execution of a certain feature or whether it's just like why we should do this feature at all. It takes practice, but this is something that I emphasize over and over on our team. And what I tell some of our designers too, like, I think you'll find, not every project you do is going to be like the most wonderful, like amazing project. There's going to be some projects that are a little more like, kind of boring and not that exciting, but always use that as an opportunity to really practice your framing. Like even if like, it's like, okay, this is an obvious feature, really try to, talk about or communicate why we're doing this and why it's going to be successful. And just use that as an opportunity to kind of practice communication. And the thing is PMs need to do this too. When they have a strategy, when they have like a direction, they have to really kind of explain like, why do they think like this is the way we're going? And more often than not, they'll usually use like data and other inputs to kind of hone that in. But when both sides can clearly communicate what the perspective is, I think it just helps with communication across everything and usually makes things go a little bit smoother. So some other ways to work through areas of disagreement. First, it's okay to just say no. Like I think a lot of designers feel like they can't say no because they want to be like a team player and everything. But, you know, whether it's like you don't have the bandwidth or the resources to do this, the time to do it, you know, it's okay to just say like, I can't do this right now, or like something's got to come off my plate if like we're going to focus on this. And, you know, if you don't agree with the direction or the feature, if you think there's something missing, like this isn't going to solve like our users' pain points, or, you know, I think this might be harmful to our users. Thankfully, hopefully you're not arguing with a PM about something that's going to harm your users. But, you know, if you do get there, it's okay to say no. Also, remember to ask the team. I think that's also a good one too. You know, sometimes like if you and your PM are like disagreeing over something, you can bring in like user research, marketing, data science, these kind of like more neutral parties that can just tell you like from a numbers perspective, like yes, no, this will work, or, you know, even just from like what we've heard in research. You know, and sometimes you can just ask the wider team too. Like this one PM and I, like we were disagreeing over a button size. It was like, the PM was like, the button needs to be this big. I'm like, it really doesn't. So we just asked the team, and like everybody weighed in, and like everybody kind of went in one direction, saying like, no, I think it should be this way. So that kind of just like stopped it. Like we're not gonna like pursue like disagreements every, like if it was like such a unanimous opinion on going one way. And then we have this thing at LinkedIn called escalations. And what escalations are is essentially two people can agree to disagree. They can't get past it. Then you basically, you know, have your perspectives. You can work on like a doc together. So each party has their perspectives, and you kind of just roll it up to leadership, where leadership will kind of play a decider, you know, based on everyone's perspectives. So the fun thing about escalations is I haven't seen many design and product escalations at LinkedIn. Generally, PMs and designers can like come to some sort of agreements. Like most escalations are product people, actually, product teams actually escalating against each other, being like, we need this built, we don't have the resources, I don't care, build it for us. But the one time I actually saw a design and product manager escalate each other was coincidentally actually how Christine and I met. So Christine and I are different teams, and Christine and my product partner actually came in an area of disagreement, and I'll tell a little bit more about that story. But that was actually a really good example of like just design just fundamentally does not agree with like the direction of where product wanted to go, and that escalation got floated up to leadership and ultimately resolved, which kind of flows nicely into the next one, which what is like working with a toxic PM. So yeah, I had a pretty bad PM. I worked with my former PM. My current one's great, but just as like Jay was saying about how, you know, important the PM is to be that nexus of communication between like all these different cross functions, they more than I would say probably any other role can create like a pretty bad team environment if they're not, you know, if they're difficult to work with, and you know, they're not just for design and product, but like all the functions. So this PM I worked with would make decisions unilaterally, like wouldn't involve people, kind of acted like the expert in everything, like expert in design, expert in marketing, expert in engineering. So this person would not bring people in, did not facilitate communication on the team, impeded it more than anything. So in that last escalation that I talked about, the way that this happened was this PM supposedly talked to Christine's team PM, and then talked to me and said like, hey, we want to do this. The Pages team is okay with it. They're cool with it. I'm like, oh, okay, as long as they're cool with it. And to be honest, I didn't know Christine at the time, so I could have easily just reached out to her. I should have just reached out to her just to confirm, but I trusted my product partner, because you should trust your product partner. You should be able to do that. And essentially, I think at the time, Christine was visiting New York, and that's when Christine first and I met, and she's like, hey, this feature you guys wrote, what is this? And I was like, oh, you don't know about that? You know, I thought my PM talked to you. And Christine's like, no, absolutely not. So Christine, you know, was really awesome to work with. She's like, hey, you know, if you want to accomplish this, we have like alternatives for you to do that. We have like a framework and ecosystem we work with. You can work within that for that. And I was like, sure, that sounds very reasonable. We'll do that. I went to go talk to my product partner, and he's like, no, that's not going to be effective. Like, we need to just like have what we already shipped, you know, like we're not going to change that. I'm like, okay. They're like, I'm going to ask, like, okay, we're going to go into an escalation. I was like, okay, well, you're kind of doing that alone, because I kind of agree with Christine on this one. So he kind of just like, without even having buy-in from his own design partner, kind of just went off into this by himself. So to me, that was like a really good example of what it's like to work with like a really bad PM. But there were some positive lessons learned. Because there wasn't much collaboration, I had to be really proactive on things. I had to really approach things, like kind of on the side a little bit, because, he would have like very strong opinions about like what we should and shouldn't be doing. And also just socialize your work too, especially depending on the size of your organization. But that was a big lesson too, is that if you can show things you're working on to engineers, to other designers, to other product partners too, and they start recognizing like, oh, this is like a good feature, a good idea, then it's not just like, that one person you're working with being like, no, we're not going to do that. Then kind of everyone starts like questioning like, oh, that was like a really cool thing. Like, why aren't you guys pursuing that? So those were some valuable lessons, that even working with this person that was just like terrible to work with, it taught me to be really proactive and really like learn to socialize your work, because there's a lot of benefits to that. Hopefully you never have to work with a bad PM. It really is the worst. So I'm gonna hand it off to Christine on being a good design partner.
Awesome, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, thanks for sharing that story. It was definitely a funny situation, because that was my first impression of Kevin too, because that was our first project. But now we're really good buddies and we work together all the time on different products. So anyway, so I want to just start kind of wrapping it up, but showing you guys, like, walking away with some good tips for how can you guys be a good design partner so that you can ensure success in these different situations that you might be dealing with. So design inherently is very collaborative. So as you know, you need to work with a lot of different people, kind of get their inputs and whatnot. But what's really important for designers is that our job is to really build consensus. So it's primarily because design, we're very horizontal. We actually see things across the ecosystem. We also go really deep. We collaborate with so many other designers on other teams. So we constantly are in the know of what's going on. Sometimes at organizations, PMs are very focused in their vertical, so they might just have a narrow purview and not know what else is going on at sometimes. So that's why it's our job to kind of tie together that ecosystem and make sure that we're collaborative and then building that consensus. What I mean by consensus too is that sometimes I've seen designers just kind of go to a design presentation, they're like, here are my ideas, and then like, and that's it. That's not really building consensus, that's sharing your work. The thing about building consensus is that you need to have some sort of set goal in mind. Like, what is the thing that you're trying to achieve through your design review? Are you trying to get decisions made so you guys can like narrow your designs? Are you trying to figure out like the final thing so you can get it shipped? All these different types of things. So it's really important as you're going into a design review to have in mind what that clear goal is and to drive the people in the audience who are providing feedback towards that consensus. Otherwise, you're going to walk out actually being more confused in your design review. I've seen that happen a lot. The other way to achieve consensus is not necessarily through a design review, but there's a lot of different things that you can do, different types of meetings. You can have a brainstorming session like Kevin was talking about, just whiteboarding with your product partner. You can do like a Google design sprint kind of workshop and bring people together that way. Design sprints are also very effective. Or there's like different levels of design reviews where you can bring in executive people to kind of share and get their perspectives, or it could be the designers that you're working with on the day-to-day who can provide you a lot more of that tactical pointed feedback. And at the end of the day, when you're doing all the facilitation, again, keep that goal in mind and make sure that you're pushing along for decisions. This is something that's really hard that I see a lot of junior designers struggling with, is how do you push people to make decisions? And sometimes all it is nudging people. You can be like, that's a really good idea. But actually, remember, our goal here today is to figure out if this is the right option. So let's try to focus on this. Or maybe asking very pointed questions back to your audience after you've presented the design and be like, okay, these are my designs. I like this one better for X, Y, Z reasons. Do you agree or disagree with me here? And let's focus on that. So you're making micro decisions along the way as you're facilitating as part of your design process. I have a question here. At LinkedIn, are designers as much their own advocates as other disciplines? I would say yes, Josh. At LinkedIn, we really do value the design process. It does vary, like Kevin said, based on your product partner in terms of what that experience is. But I think our job as a design manager in particular is to make sure that there is that healthy relationship between our designers and PMs and engineering partners, and how we producing quality work. And if we feel like design isn't getting a voice at that table, we do have these escalation channels and other ways to kind of raise ourselves and making sure that we are heard. So some tips that I want to walk away with for designers is, when you're working with a PM, first thing, it's okay to make suggestions. Even though the PM is owning the strategy doc and the PRDs, they don't know everything. So if there's something that you're reading where you're like, that doesn't really make sense, or that's going to be a really weird user experience, feel free to push back. Don't just take things for face value and do it, and just see the product later on, and you'll have this gut feeling where you're like, dang it, I should have said something because I told you so. The second thing is communicate and be proactive. Again, like when you get a PRD, don't just start in that right away. Take a step back. Look at all the research that's around you. Ask your partners and data science and research to see if there's anything else out there. That's being proactive to try to figure out how to find a solution. And then the other thing too is that large organizations at LinkedIn, there's a lot of specialists. So as a designer, you have to constantly communicate with people to let them know where you are in your status, what problems you're trying to solve, how can people help unblock you. It's really important to be very proactive with your communications to be successful. And then the last thing is raise issues and ask for help. It's okay if you don't know everything. And I think sometimes when you join an organization, you might be shy in terms of asking questions because everyone seems like they're so smart. Or maybe, you're junior and you're not confident in your design ability yet. It's totally fine if you have a particular question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. Feel free to raise it. And when you're stuck, let your manager or let your team know immediately so that they can help you unblock. There's no harm in doing that. It's actually better because later on down the line, you might end up losing time or some other type of thing. So I'm going to hand it off to Jay real quick to share an example of when he worked with a really good designer on a product and what he learned from that.
Thanks, Christine. I'm going to start with a caveat that the antagonist in Kevin's story was not me. I am not that PM that he hated and dreaded. So let's just get that clear.
Not Jay.
Yeah, not me. Just very clear. That'd be really awkward in preparing a presentation like this. But talking about this story, I have a couple of people in mind. I'm not going to talk about my wife because that's just begging for things. So when I talk about like working with a good designer, given the role that PMs have, it sounds a lot like at first glance that we're a bottleneck, and we really shouldn't be. And PMs should strive to become valuable but not critical. And in order to become that way, you have to create this what's the right word? Circle of trust or level of trust when it comes to your partners, your engineers, your designers, etc. So in one scenario, one designer I truly love working with, more recently, I guess in the last couple of years, is where we were tackling this one feature set to build that is just lagging on our system fundamentally around how do we actually help people market in a full funnel throughout their entire journey to a number of customers that might be willing to buy their product. So we need to build functionality that currently Facebook or Google or other platforms already have solutions for. So, we sat down to talk about the PRD, but actually spent the majority of our conversation talking about, well, why are we doing this? What are the needs? And, he asked me for what he values most from a product partner, which is what's the current marketplace dynamic? What are the behaviors that our products are inspiring on our current platform? Where do we think this fits in? Asking me for my own design input on where I think that might best sit. And at the same time, encouraging me to share a little bit more knowledge with them. So we spent a great deal of time just level setting around why we're doing this, what's really important, what's out there, and how does this just project fit in before actually getting into like the nuts and bolts of what we should do. And I think that's really key because it puts us in a scenario to be advocates for one another. We align fundamentally on what we want to do. We don't have to get into pixel perfect discussions at that point in time. We are now enabled to go into other meetings with engineers, et cetera, to at least speak on each other's behalf. And I feel comfortable. And like the greatest testament is I took a DTO a few sprints into the project starting. And when they asked, who's going to be there for Scrum of Scrums or who's going to be there for End Review, I said, here, my designer will be there. It's totally fine. And that got reflected back a few weeks later, as Kevin mentioned or Christine mentioned, when we started having design review. When they ask for why you're building this a certain way, and it doesn't seem intuitive with the rest of the platform, my design partner said, hey, do you mind speaking to that? And we're doing it this way because it mirrors behavior we see on consumer applications, not standard to what our current platform is doing, but it makes the most sense to do it that way. We test it out, we validate it out, et cetera, et cetera. And having that kind of relationships allows me to be at ease, allows me to feel like when my designer talks to my engineer, it's not like they're asking me for approval to go do that in the first place. It also puts me at ease in the sense that I trust them wholeheartedly that they understand the business requirements. So that as they design towards solution, we've had that conversation, how that fits into the roadmap or the strategy. So they're not designing for right now, this one behavior, this one user flow, right? And that's not context that would be readily available in the kind of relationship that Kevin mentioned before, where it's very transactional, right? But I come back to the question of why. If you know why, if you push and you get an answer why, like there's so much to be taken from that, because I trust that you'll do the right thing with that knowledge. And now my only problem is trying to get that designer back, because we are always design resource deficient. Trying to get that designer back on my project is like my #1 struggle, but like, what can I do about that? Christine, I'm gonna ask you for a plug as a result of coming to this presentation for you to advocate on my behalf. But yeah, that's my #1 takeaway.
Awesome, thanks, Jay. And fun fact, I don't know if you know, but your 2 favorite designers that you work with on LMS are also both CCA grads. So, yeah.
Yeah, I hear. I mean, I expect great things from this group. They've been just tremendous. And if you talk to them now, I would say that the way that they work with the team holistically has changed over the last couple of years. They are strong engineering partners, not just design partners. And so, I would definitely encourage you, if you take, everything that we're saying here is be involved, be communicative. And if you have a strong PM that doesn't have a delicate ego, they'll welcome that change. It's refreshing to have that level of overlap and partnership.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Jay, for sharing. So I'll just walk away with this last, I swear this is our last slide. So being a good partner takes effort, both on the design and product side. So I just kind of want to summarize some high level key takeaways for you all in terms of the presentation. So being a good design partner, what does that mean? So do things like this. Ask questions, gather research and data. Don't take things for face value, even if the product manager seems to, have a very strong perspective. It's okay to ask questions and validate and understand what the true user value is that you're trying to solve for the product that you're building. The second thing, share your designs early and often. We talked a lot about communication, how important that is to get buy-in. Be flexible. Understand that the design process changes so much. Even the business strategy can change with the drop of the dime, depending on a VP might have some perspective somewhere, and then you guys have to shift over as a team all of a sudden. And then also being receptive to design feedback. I think sometimes I see junior designers who are very tied to their designs, but it's not about your ego, and it's not so much about your designs that people are giving feedback on. It's they're just trying to make the product better. And then lastly, just be proactive and communicate. And then just some things to be wary about. Don't expect PMs to know everything around how you want to work, what your communication styles are. Make sure you share that. Be very clear with your design goals. Again, don't walk into a design review and just be like, here's everything that I did, and then just like have no direction whatsoever in that meeting. Don't do just what you're told. Don't keep issues to yourself. Remember, there's escalation processes and things like that at organizations to help you so that you don't have to be stuck figuring out this problem yourself. And don't spend too much time going back and forth. I think this is the hardest thing as designers. And sometimes you can keep going in the design process and it feels like you're never finished. But if you're stuck again, at some point you need to make that call and be like, this is good enough. If you're having trouble, work with the team to figure that out. So with that, we kind of want to ask you guys, based on this presentation today, what's something new that you learned, or something that you might be like really excited now in terms of learning about how to work with PMs? Would love to hear that, and we can open it up for questions. It's okay if you didn't learn anything.
No, I was just I was taking a second to think about that, but thank you so much. I actually really,
oh, sorry. I don't know if I missed it, but My mic is on, right? It is. Is it? Okay. There was an example of like, an example of a bad PM, and just hearing that example, that story, kind of, hopefully I could remember it and like look for flags or signals when it starts, going that way. But what do you do when you have that, when you have that bad PM kind of working on your team kind of thing, or like you're working from, like what are some of the stuff you can mitigate, because a lot of the times you can't choose your PMs and so on.
Yeah, if you don't mind, could we hold off that question first real quick? And then, yeah, I think Lurika, you were saying something, and then we'll get back to your question. I promise we will talk about how to work with bad PMs more. So.
Sorry, I thought my sound wasn't working. Yeah, I was asking, firstly, yeah, thank you for doing this. It's great to get a window into like what it really is like. And I think in grad school, there's so much focus on the communication aspect, and we forget that not all organizations believe that design needs to be part of the process. It sounds like you're lucky that well, for designers, it's awesome that LinkedIn is one of those places. And so I'm curious about how, once you've transitioned to working from home, what it's been like dealing with that kind of communication around conflict management, or when you don't align on things, how that's been, especially for new people on the team. I'm very curious about that. Like it's different when you have an established connection with the people that you're working with. But if any of you have experiences around new people on a team and how it's been for them to communicate, PM or designer wise.
Yeah, for sure. And I stopped sharing because now we're in questions, so I can better see people. Yeah, Kevin, Jay, do you want to take on that question, or I can jump in too?
Sure, go for it, Christine.
Okay. Yeah. So I think like a lot of it is just like it's expectation setting. So in terms of just making sure you have a really good partnership, I think a lot of the times when we're eager at work, we want to jump straight into the work right away, but you might not have actually built any rapport up with that individual, whether it's a product manager or engineering manager. So I actually highly recommend to all my new hires and always like new designers that join to like spend the first week actually just meeting people, meet the people that you're going to be working with, learn more about their personalities, learn what how their communication style is, what makes them tick, what do they enjoy, and share that about yourself as well. And that establishes some basis level of a relationship, because at the end of the day, when you're kind of doing a lot of the work, you're going to have a lot of different conflicts and stuff like that. And dealing with conflict resolution makes it much easier if you have a good relationship with that person, because at that point, it feels less harsh to deliver bad feedback because you're kind of already on friendly terms. Like I feel like working with Kevin and Jay, if I didn't like something that they were working on, I would have no problem telling them that, and like in a very direct manner, and they won't take it personally. But it's because I've built relationships with them over time. So that's something I think that's going to be really critical as you kind of think about that when going into work at the first go.
Awesome,
yeah.
Thanks.
Cool. And then we'll get back to the other question that came. So, okay, dealing with bad PMs. Kevin, do you want to jump into that one a little bit more, especially since you don't get to choose who you work with?
Yeah, exactly. You don't get to choose who you work with, but you have to work with them. So obviously we talked about like all the different ways you can kind of get past like conflict resolution. You can keep doing those. And if you exhaust those, there's always opportunities in organizations to give feedback on someone. So like you could give it to them yourself, but you can also kind of raise it a little bit further. So I would always say like always give feedback and always be very candid, because at least it shows that you've raised this issue and like raised it with them. So it's not just something you're holding yourself and then nobody knows that there's a problem. So always make sure you're doing that. Like I said, try to work with this person as much as you can, and really demonstrate that you're the one that's like being flexible here, and you're not like that this issue is not like a mutual thing. And then I would say also, other ways to do it is see if you can, and it depends on your organization. Sometimes you can ask to work on a different project, work on a different team. That's always an option there too. It's a little bit more tough. And then like ultimately, it's like either comes down to like you leaving or them leaving. I was fortunate enough that this person was asked to leave. And I think that's really great when it talks about your organization and you know what they value. Like when your organization recognizes this is a problem and this person's causing a problem for a lot of people, and they kind of ask that person to leave, I think that is probably one of the more effective things. Like I didn't have to choose between like LinkedIn and working with this person, thankfully. And I'm very thankful for that. Yeah, so I would say find ways to work, do what you can, don't hold it to yourself, keep giving feedback on that, and then ultimately, try to exhaust all options.
Yeah, and to add on to that, oh yeah,
go ahead.
Okay, I was going to just add one little point to Kevin's. As a manager too, we also have some choice in terms of which where designers kind of focus their attention. So sometimes I've had instances where the PM was just like so disorganized, or the asks were not very clear. And I was like, well, design, we don't have a big team. So I'm just going to pull this person off this project until you get your shit together, and they're going to work on something more important. And, that type of thing. So I think there's a little bit of choice that we have too, depending on the structure of the design team. So yeah, go ahead, Jay.
I'm gonna bring us away a little bit from the edge, where it's the bad actor scenario PM. There's definitely
yeah,
scenarios.
I know you guys aren't all bad, right?
I have to, right? Like, so I think everyone has different styles, right? And there's this mainstream common set of styles where everyone's very nice and everything. But when you get in the weeds, you're gonna hit some conflict, as Kevin and Christine mentioned. There's definitely gonna be PMs that are maybe not a great partner to you, but not intending to be that way. They are unconsciously doing little habits or tics that maybe don't jive with you. Now, in that scenario, which can occur, there's two things that need to happen. As you guys mentioned, communication, definitely. How you communicate, really critical about this. Can you ask why before you ask, why are we thinking about this? Why do we do that? Rather than you shouldn't do this. Like, this is a terrible decision, right? So communication is really key. And the second part to that is also the self-awareness phase, right? Because when we get really wrapped up in our work, PM or designer or otherwise, we feel very possessive of our work. We feel a lot of ownership to that. So there's places where we would feel defensive and not ourselves. So I would certainly encourage and probably index what we're saying all to date. There are definitely bad actors, and if you are a bad PM, your ability to affect the entire team is so much greater than any other role. But having said that, it's also important to check yourself, ask, help them grow. Maybe they're just not mature enough in that role, and there's an opportunity for you to help them with that as well. And that burden doesn't fall on you if you're able to distance yourself a little bit from that problem.
Well said, Jay. There's a question here in the chat. Do you use any specific software for team management? Jay, maybe that's a little bit more for you around the resourcing and stuff like that.
Oh man, yeah. So in development, use any kind of development tracking system like Jira, One Process, things like that. Of course, Trello if you're a startup and whatnot. For resource management, there's no solid silver bullet. People use Excel files to just coordinate. Communications, what matters is make sure that you have low and a fast communication process. You'll have something for like Slack, right? And that people knew and use Teams. Or you have slow, which is like email, because you want to make sure that your team understands that sense of urgency. But I'd say that it's not like one size fits all. You don't usually get to choose when you join a company as well. You can advocate for it, but it's important that you learn how the team uses a system and whether or not they operate well with that system, because you're new to that team when you join. And if you identify a few months in that certain things don't work well, then it's worth mentioning. It's bringing up, for the team as well. What you don't want is to be stuck on one way. The truth is that means that you're not understanding how the team operates in the current fashion before you make a recommendation.
I've got a question, or maybe not entirely a question so much as like something that's been steeping for me over the course of this. As a prelude to that, I'm so floored by you guys giving us this much time and attention, and it's like this was an unbelievable presentation. So thank you so much. And I want to acknowledge that you asked us like what we learned from it. So as a way of saying, part of saying thanks, I think, is like, this is what I've been thinking about and learning over the course of this. You put up that diagram of like the Venn diagram overlap of like what makes a successful product release, and have it be sort of in line with business interests, what the user needs, and also that it's well executed. And I feel like that in some ways I'm like situating this map of what Kevin Batoon talked about of sitting at the intersection of business, design, and technology. And you can sort of, I mean, it's like, it's not quite that perfect. And that's what I'm interested in, is like, I feel like in some ways you could map the three disciplines, design, engineering, and like product management to, right, well executed for engineering, advocating on behalf of the users for design, right? And then the PM advocating on behalf of the business. And yet it's not that clear. And what we're hearing is that people participate in all parts of those, right? And I could see the designer having a serious stake both in it being well executed and also it being representative of the business decisions. And so I'm wondering, like, both, is there, like, do you also see that everybody sort of participates in all of that? And especially, like, how do you then bring in this engineering component into that equation so that they're sort of advocating for the whole system as well?
I would say,
Kevin, do you want to start?
Yeah, I would say,
I
would say with engineers, my experience working on that is it's highly dependent on the engineer. There are engineers that are very interested in like being involved in the business side, the design side, and like, like trying to figure out like what are we doing and why are we doing it. And then there's some engineers that are just like, I don't care, I just want to code, So I think like my experience so far has been that it's highly dependent on the engineers. And it's really, I try to recognize which of the engineers I work with are more interested in that stuff and try to include them early on in the process. But I've also had times where I'm just like, we're going to do a research brainstorm session or something, and then like bring all the engineers in, and like some engineers are like, oh my God, this is wasting my time. So like really trying to recognize which ones are interested in that, which is good because that helps strengthen your relationship with the engineering team, which is always pretty essential for design. Jay, did you want to say something, or Christine?
Jay, you can go.
I think it varies. I mean, that's a simple answer depending on the org and the team. But I think oftentimes we find ourselves treating engineering as a little bit different to the side. And in truth, it couldn't be any farther from the truth, especially if you work in a startup. So you'll see designers doing stuff, rapid prototyping, working in Ember.js, even though maybe that's not their core job, right? You'll see, I've had engineers playfully yell at me for committing code when I was working at a startup. He's like, guys, we need to ship this thing. And like, I spent a weekend working on it. And they're like, okay, we'll fix everything. But they're appreciative because they know how I understand the problem that we're trying to solve, right? And some technical ramifications. So we've definitely, really well-oiled system. I mean, you start with empathy and trust, but it's also able to understand the guardrails, restrictions, requirements that everyone is operating under. And, that's the ideal situation. And short of that, depending on the org structure, everyone's strengths, like I think is a responsibility for each of us in order to create a better environment for ourselves to operate as a PM, as a designer, as an engineer, to extend just a little bit, right? Because if you can bring people into what your problem is, how you work, and your solutions that you're proposing, it creates that discourse that is much easier to navigate rather than treating it as, I do this, let me hand off, right? But again, it will vary according to the company that you're joining.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, Maxime, you hit the nail on the head. It's not clear cut at all, and actually, and sometimes like engineering is actually quite involved in this entire software development lifecycle process too. They're sitting in some of these strategy reviews as well and providing perspectives to PM. They're at our design reviews and giving us perspective of whether or not it's technologically feasible. And then when they're building and coding, they're coming to us to confirm the solutions and stuff, and we're going to be with them as well to just like make sure that the quality is good. So it's the thing is, we all have to kind of balance each other out. And the thing that's really key about this is that being a designer or a product manager or an engineer, a really stellar one, can actually really understand the roles that we're doing in the other groups, and to be able to switch and articulate and communicate in a way that makes sense to those people. So sometimes when I'm communicating with engineers, like they're thinking about a very technical solution. I'm not technical, I don't know how to code, but at least I talk about the design in a way that can help them understand the importance of building it in a particular component, or building it why we have to structure it this way so it's scalable for the user system and stuff like that. So you kind of have to tweak that, versus when I'm talking a product, it's a little bit more of like, okay, I'll bring it higher level, like more of the strategy, like how are we going to bring this out to market, things like that. So I think that's going to be a really important part as you embark in your designer journey, to be very mindful of how you communicate with these different stakeholders, and constantly remember that they have like different things that they care about too, and kind of morph your situation to be flexible in those situations.
Would you go so far as saying that if you see a team or an organization where those roles are extremely clear cut, that is a red flag?
That's a good question, Jay.
Depends if everyone's happy that way, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's fair, because there's some organizations where designers are highly specialized and they want to be, and that's totally fine. But yeah, I think like if you look at most of the big tech companies, Jay, I think most of us are like at LinkedIn, like Facebook, Google, Apple, like all of us are kind of like, we kind of wear the hats of each other sometimes as we're working. So yeah.
I think it would be a red flag for me, like just based on the, like what you guys are really selling this kind of ideology. So like, I don't want to work in an organization that's siloed like that. Cause I feel like, especially the way we've been taught at CCA to sort of rapidly iterate, be constantly researching, that means that we have to be implementing prototypes and showing them to the people that we're actually designing for. And that just like, that requires you to be able to have these conversations in real time. So yeah, it's for sure. Thank you for sort of highlighting that, because I think it's definitely going to be something that I pay attention to when I'm looking for work.
All right, I want to be conscious of you guys' time. This is like, I think, almost perfect timing. I guess unless maybe one quick more we could, or we can wrap it up now. Guess I have to jump at 2. Regardless, thank you so much to the 3 of you. This was fantastic. I love how you put it, Maxime, about like what we talked about today and the value this has for our cohort. So we couldn't be more grateful. And yes, we'll be sharing the presentation, and yes, there is a recording.
Awesome. We can probably take one more question. Anyone want to finish this off?
No pressure, guys.
I actually had one if nobody has one.
Yeah, go for it, Farah.
Okay, so we did talk a lot about bad actors, and I think that my mind was stuck at setting the objectives. I think if that can be really clear in the beginning, maybe that can sort of be in a better position. I don't know. But what I was thinking was, when you guys are talking about setting expectations, what all areas am I supposed to cover with the PM? Is it about my working style, what they expect out of me? What else am I missing? What are the broader themes that I should sit and discuss?
Yeah, Kevin, you want me to start, or do you want to chime in?
Yeah, why don't you start? I can chime in.
Yeah, so it depends on which stage that you're working with them too. So I think in the beginning, a lot of it is like when you're kicking off the project or just kind of knowing that person, it's more of the rapport building. And then when you're kind of starting off the project, a lot of it is just deep understanding. Don't even open Sketch or Figma at that point and start designing. That's a #1 mistake I see some junior designers doing, is that they go straight from the PRD to designs. They don't have time to think about it. Sit down, think about it, ask questions, set those expectations too. Like maybe you start sparking some ideas. You're like, wait a second, in the PRD, it doesn't cover this, but I think it's actually really fundamental to the product. So why are we skipping this step? And going back to your product manager and having those conversations. And as you're kind of having these conversations too, if you notice that they're kind of pushing back on you, well, then you might want to re-level set some of those expectations and be like, okay, well, it seems like you have a strong perspective. Is there other documentation that I'm missing? Is there something that I should be reading up to better understand that? And how can I effectively give you this communication back? And then the same way goes when you start going in the design process, the PM is going to be giving you a lot of feedback too. sometimes you're gonna have PMs who are very hands-on, who are gonna, like Kevin said, care about the color, the button size, and all that stuff. And then some are just like, okay, this is fine, just ship it. And you might not want that level of feedback. It's either too narrow or too broad. And then you have to reset that expectation again with your product partner around like, you know, thanks for giving me that feedback, but I'm actually looking for more of this. Can you help me here? So with the expectation setting, you're constantly resetting it is my point here, depending on which stage, and as you're kind of figuring out that working dynamic with that particular individual and the level of pressures that you have with that particular project, you're going to have to constantly like tweak that style. So.
Yeah, I would just add to that. That actually reminded me, like a good example of this is actually when I first started at LinkedIn, and like I knew my first project I was going to be working on was live video. And I think in like the first week, our PM was just like, so if you want to do some wireframes now, I'm like, no, I don't want to do wireframes right now. I don't know what we're doing right now. I don't know why we're doing it. So, you know, it was incumbent on me to be like, you know, like, no, let's understand why we're doing this. Like, do we have any user research? Like all these questions and stuff. So really kind of figuring that out and setting the expectation of like, no, I'm just going to jump into wireframes. Like, it's crazy.
Thank you.
All right. And that puts us perfectly on time. Wow, I've never said that before. Thank you all again. And thank you everyone in the call for being here. This was better than we could have hoped. It was an amazing kickoff. Just a reminder, these will occur on a pretty much weekly basis throughout the semester. So next week we have working with engineers coming up. We'll have a post or more details out about that today, but it should be super fun. We will do some breakout rooms, some exercises, but a lot of good content just like today, I hope. And thank you again for being here.
Yeah, and last thing I want to add to, thank you Tess and Purva and Shervin for organizing this, and Josh for your presentation and being here as well. We are very honored to speak to this group and excited to share our knowledge. And if you guys ever have any questions after this, feel free to reach out to Jay, Kevin, and myself on LinkedIn. I do ask if you do, please write us a little note so we remember how we met you, since we didn't get a chance to meet everyone, but we're more than happy to answer any other questions going from here. So.
Thanks, guys.
Excellent.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.